If Pokemon was rebooted, how would the art style change? Would old Pokemon look the same, be discarded entirely, or be redesigned? One of the most notable aspects to Pokemon is how they look. Over the years, we have been given hundreds of cool, cute, and not so cool or cute looking creatures that we have come to love and unhealthily obsess over. If a reboot would throw all that art out the window, would we just arrive at the same place we are now? I will be upfront with you about this topic. I am not an artist or character designer. Though I can postulate about how Pokemon could change in these fields, I won't be able to give an expert opinion on it. However, this topic does provide a good opportunity to dive into research about its history and speculate on the future of Pokemon's art style. The first step towards redesigning anything is to try to understand as much as you can about how something currently stands. So to organize my thoughts, I've split this topic into 3-part episodes, each one focusing on a different aspect to the art for Pokemon: graphics, character design, and art style. I'll be talking about how these categories have changed over time for Pokemon and what could be done for them in terms of a reboot. Graphics refers to how everything gets displayed on the screen. Artistic change in graphics is pretty obvious. They started with 32 by 32 pixels for any Pokemon on the Game Boy, with some sprite effects for animations, while today we have the latest games on Nintendo Switch with fancy 3D models and actual animations. Character design is the physical features that make up a character or creature. The driving force behind a character's design are the concepts, themes, personality, and guidelines which create a criteria for how any characters look and how that fits into its world. Kingdom Hearts is a series of games that consist of Disney and Final Fantasy characters. Sora's original design, the main character, therefore contains elements familiar to both those franchises within his design. Cartoonish shoes and pants with bright primary colors, Disney, but with spiky hair and too many chains, Final Fantasy. Art style, although generally part of a character's design, is all about how the lines, colors, and textures all meet to form an image. For example, here's Teen Titans that started in 2003 with an anime-esque look, and here is Teen Titans Go, that is, not that. Same character designs, very different art style. For part 1 of this topic, we'll start here. Before I begin, however, I just want to give a heads up that for this little series about art, I will be recommending you watch other people's videos more than any other subject in this poker study. This topic is just so big, and other people, who have far more experience on character design and animation than I do, have already created fantastic content that covers this to a depth I just can't. But it is from these videos that I draw the conclusions and ideas that I offer under the context of a reboot. You don't have to watch all of them, but I strongly recommend at least 2 of them, since I will be directly referencing their material. The first is by Dan Floyd of New Frame Plus, titled How Has Pokemon's Animation Evolved? He talks about the techniques and changes in animation that happened with each mainline Pokemon game that came as a result of hardware upgrades. The second video is from Joseph Catalanello, or Jocat on YouTube, How Do You Design a Pokemon?, where he takes a close look at the design criteria and process of creating Pokemon. Both these videos actually recommend each other, so it fits that you should watch both of them together, as they provide all the context for what I think a reboot could address on these topics. These 2 videos are actually what inspired me to do this whole design study on Pokemon and looking into what it could do with a reboot. Although I have long had ideas about what I would do with Pokemon games, it was these videos that made me want to look at all aspects of the mainline series design in relation to what today's techniques and technology can provide. You could pause here and go watch them, but that could take some time, so if you don't want to watch them now, that's mostly okay. But definitely go see Dan Floyd's video before part 2 and Jocat's before part 3. A quick note now, though. There is a point at the halfway mark in Jocat's video where he summarizes what a number of people in the community have been voicing about the design of Pokemon in the most recent games. Should they not undergo a new, better standard? Should Game Freak adapt the design criteria of Pokemon to match the advancing technology and design techniques that have developed since the days of the Game Boy? See, the challenge of both design and animation for this specific franchise is the quantifying effect of adding Pokemon over time, as discussed by Dan Floyd. Looking back at the old games, they inspired a great deal of imagination. My thinking is, no graphics engine in the world can beat the creative engine and emotional connection that takes place inside the human brain. Yet. So, in the meantime, should we scale back to something more akin to the earlier generations, or push forwards with the technology we have today? The majority of Pokemon players are adults, which is good for business since adults are the ones with the disposable income, and a lot of them hold the first few generations of the series very close to their heart. We know this if only from the amount of remakes that have been done of just the first generation alone. Pokemon Go proved a massive success instantly, and no small part of that was due to the nostalgia hit that came with only Gen 1 Pokemon being available at the time. And I think that the art style plays its fair role in the appeal of those games. As Game Freak and the Pokemon Company have refined the look and design of their intellectual property, there has been a subtle shift over time towards what they feel appeals to the most amount of players. The look of Pokemon started with a more animalistic style and shifted over time to a more rounder, flatter, cartoony look. Here are some examples of what I mean, and character design does play a part in what I'm about to say, but I'm mostly looking at the way the art style is illustrated for now. Let's start with Pidgey. This is the illustration that has represented this Pokemon since 2009, I believe, and is very true to its 1998 version. The details are quite defined for a small Pokemon. You can see roughage in the feathers, small nail-like talons on the feet, and many jutting parts that come off the body like the eyebrows, tail, and wings, which is emphasized further, although subtly, with the shading that comes to jagged points over the body. The beak is open, and the eyes are sharp. Even when you look at the in-game sprite from Pokemon Yellow, you have all these details. Now, let's have a look at some small birds from the most recent generations. Here is Fletchling from Gen 6 and Pikipek from Gen 7. The feathers and roughage are kept rounded and uniform. The feet, although coming to a point, don't have talons or nails to make them look threatening. The beak looks like one object and the eyes are soft and round. The segments on the body look flat against it. Even the shading doesn't bump over the body, it's smooth and curves with the shape. There is nothing rough or wild about these designs. Their evolutions gain slightly more rough and sharp looks, as most bigger, more powerful Pokemon do, but not by that much. They keep very well to the style. If Pidgey never existed and was introduced to Pokemon in the latest generation, here is what it would probably look like. See what I mean? Same character design, different art style. You can basically take everything I have said about Pidgey and see it in Growlithe as well, and then compare it to Rockruff from Gen 7. For some other examples, here is Vulpix from Gen 1 and Zorua from Gen 5. And here they are probably if they were given a generational swap. Keep in mind, the fox is the animal these two are inspired from, so it's not unfair to make these assumptions. If you want an in-game reference, look no further than the Kanto and Alolan forms of Persian. Thanks. I hate it. Okay, so that was a low blow. Here's Pikachu. Although it has been slimmed down, the original short-armed, chunky boy design made it look more like a wild mouse. Additionally, the ears and tail have since had their sharp look softened. A very important note to make about how the art style changed over time is to talk a bit about the graphics side of things with the hardware limitations of the Game Boy. A very limited amount of pixels was used to illustrate an idea of what these creatures look like. It is very difficult to make something as small as the eyes nice and round when you have very few squares to work with. Pokemon of the latest generations have more colors and features, not to an extreme amount so as to avoid alienating the original designs, but they have left the color and resolution limits behind. which naturally influences both character design and art style. The look of the Pokemon faces in the first 2 generations were very limited by what could be put on the screen. The anime-style eyes are simpler to illustrate because triangles and rectangles are easier than circles. This all said though, the original blue, red, green versions had very round, soft-looking Pokemon art style. They shifted more towards a sharper anime look just a few years later for the yellow version because of the new anime for it. Not to mention bringing the games to a Western audience. Actually, this is a good time to bring up a little history. In 1996, when the games first came out, they only released in Japan, coming to Western audiences in 1998. In that process of translation and distribution came a round of redesign on the illustrations. Although they were very similar to before, a number of them gained some improvements to the clarity of their design. For Pokemon Yellow, a couple of years later, they all got a rather radical change, as mentioned, probably due to the new television show. However, one thing can be observed with the art style for the entirety of Generation 1 and even Generation 2, no matter what the version. They all had an air of being wild creatures. The next video I'm going to recommend is from TotallyNotMark with his video, The Devolving Designs. If you watch it, and you should, you'll hear a little bit of a repeat of what you have heard so far, but also great details about the history of the art on the development team. Around the halfway mark, he puts it all very elegantly in this paragraph. These revised designs for Red and Blue actually looked as though they were sketches of wild creatures from a biologist's journal. They aren't posing for the camera for the most part, they are either attacking it in a defensive position or looking off elsewhere. Character creatures, not toy adverts. Pocket monsters, not pocket toys. That video makes a lot of good observations, and that last line about pocket monsters versus pocket toys is really at the heart of how Pokemon has changed over time. For the first 2 generations, both the character design and the art style were leaning towards Pokemon being more the rough and wild look. These days, they are toys or mascots. For my own personal preference, I would go with the old, rougher style. Maybe not so much the angry-looking eyes. My favorite legendary Pokemon is Articuno, which is arguably among the most animalistic-looking in the bunch. I think even taking the more recently created Pokemon and reintroducing them in the reboot as a more rough-round-the-edges, wild-eyed look would be very appealing. I would turn them all back into pocket monsters and not pocket toys. And that about covers everything I have to say about it. Okay, I won't leave it at that. I have argued my case for my own bias. I will now argue against what I have suggested because all ideas deserve critique. There is a very good reason why the art style has gotten to where it is today. They have studied their target audience and have shifted everything to appeal to as wide a group as possible. The softer, rounder look of Pokemon with flat color segments on the body make for much easier time creating plushies and other merchandising. Also, perhaps Game Freak prefers it this way. When you look at how early these art style shifts started to occur, and speaking as a game designer, you should go with the type of game you would enjoy playing the most. Well, speaking as an indie dev, I can't really speak for AAA or highly grossing companies. Of course, the only voices you're going to hear are the ones that are dissatisfied with the current product. People don't tend to constantly praise what they are happy and content with. If they changed the art style to something that would get myself and a number of others more invested in the games, they may find that millions of new dissatisfied voices would arise. The greatest evidence for this is that despite the upset that was displayed in the Pokemon fan community over the poor-looking graphics for Pokemon Sword and Shield, it still sold the fastest the Switch had ever sold games at that time of their release. Just because adults make for the largest part of the audience doesn't mean that this softer, cartoony style isn't appealing to them. I know there are plenty of them out there that very much like the way that it is and wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, just look at Wooloo. It's perfect. In conclusion for the art style, regardless of whether they stick with the current trend of plushies, go back to the old style of wild and rough creatures, or come up with something different again, a reboot is the perfect time to cement that art style from the start and maintain it for the next batch of games. With all this in mind, I look forward to seeing you for part 2 of this look into the art of Pokemon. Please, let me know in the comments what artistic representation you would prefer for Pokemon. Do you prefer how Pokemon are designed today over the original style? Have you seen fan art in a new style that you love over anything else? Go ahead, tell me about it. As a reminder, if you haven't seen Dan Floyd's How Has Pokemon's Animation Evolved?, give it a watch before part 2. Otherwise, press the like button, hit the blossom, subscribe if you haven't, and you will make my Wooloo feel so much joy. Continue to be wonderful to each other, and I'll see you next time.